if the motorists top up their tanks, you drain the finished gasoline system. I mean, it's like your individual car running out of gas. We haven't run out of gasoline, but your car's out of gas. And my guess is that we basically have to then go through a long period of, it took so long to build up that cushion, that we have to go through a long period of very limited amount of driving and get the refinage cranked up again and basically get all of our import systems to fill the tank back up. So it's not a permanent problem, but in reality it's a problem so utterly awful that it might as well be permanent, because the brutal implications, running out of food is the most serious implication of this, because again, it really probably takes somewhere between 5 and 7 days before the shelves of America are basically empty, and if we don't have our trucking system. And without diesel and gasoline, we don't have trucks.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
I'm with Matt Simmons, who's an eminent energy investment person, and this week we've had a bailout and all kinds of meltdown in our financial system. One would think that you would be terribly worried about that, but what you said today is you're worried about something even more risky. Tell us about that.
Well, our financial system, we have a lot of tools to fix our financial system if we apply them swiftly and fast. You print more paper, and it has some sort of unintended consequences. What I'm worried about is the implications of how many parts of the country are now running out of gasoline. And the worry that the motorists then start topping up their tanks, and we have a little run on our gasoline pool and we run out. There is no fix for that.
Are we really that close that if everybody said, we might have a little bit of shortages in our gas and oil, and everybody tops up their tanks?
It would drain the system.
And what would that happen then?
Well, we'd be out of gas.
Then? So?
Once we're out of gas, we're out of food in less than a week. And the system ends.
Does anybody running our system know about this, have any contingency plans?
We have no contingency plans. I suspect not many people have ever thought through how quickly this could unravel. But, it's like a week ago, if you'd have asked Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, both very bright guys, do you think this financial system could melt down this week? They would have said, I bet, no. But these gasoline supplies, they're too low. I mean, there should have been a huge furor when the EIA reported last Wednesday that our finished gasoline stocks, and this was as of 2 weeks ago this coming Friday, we're now down to the lowest level we had since 1969.
Whoa, 1969,
yeah.
40 years.
Yeah. I mean, and for people to sort of, and ironically, gasoline prices were headed down because of the perception that the hurricane was over and it didn't cause any problems. And I just watched all this and saying, here we go. We're barreling, we're running full bore right over the edge of the Grand Canyon.
What is it that anybody can do about that? Because your advice is not going to be go top off your tank.
No. Have you ever heard that great term, could have done, would have done? There are a lot of things we could have done, but we didn't. We ran out the clock. So now we just have to hunker down and hope that we get the refineries up far quicker than seems likely, that we get the electricity going on in these. I mean, what's happening is that the artery that supplies all this stuff has been maimed. And so what we're doing is we're using up the last of our usable supplies. And that's what the news was all weekend. Atlanta out of gas, Nashville out of gas, Tallahassee out of gas. And it does happen. We never, ever should have let ourselves get so close to the edge on a mantra of we're so efficient today that we have just-in-time management. And I've been reeling about that for about 10 years and saying sooner or later it's going to bite us in the behind. And I'm afraid that bite is probably happening as we speak.
Matt, if you were the advisor to the next presidential president, what would you be advising them to do about energy?
Well, what I have told many of our politicians that want to listen is that we basically need to, first of all, recognize how serious the problem is and how deep the hole we dug ourselves in. and how inexpensive energy prices are today versus what the current thinking is. Let's find the gougers that created these high prices. And it isn't any one problem. We dug ourselves into a hole that started 50 years ago, and it's going to take a long, long time to get out of it. And we have to basically go on a fast retreat of our heavy addiction to oil and gas and use less.
What would we do instead? What are we going to do to run our transport?
Liberate the workforce and pay by productivity, and people work at home.
Which will handle a lot of our office workers and so on, folks that can connect with the internet. Won't necessarily handle, we have to rebuild our infrastructure, factories.
Yeah, but that will take some time to do. You know, we have no very good data, to double negative. We have poor data on exactly what drives our 9.5 million barrels a day gasoline demand. Other than I'll occasionally see estimates out of the AAA that 2/3 is basically peak hour long distance commuting. It's traffic congestion.
Just sitting in traffic, in congestion.
Yeah. You can take a 40 mile per gallon car and get stuck in the traffic, and you go down to 3 or 4 miles per gallon. And so ending long distance commuting at peak hours. And we have the tools to do that. We just don't have the institutional mindset to tell people. I mean, last week, for instance, our firm decided that even though the downtown Houston opened up last Monday, there were too much glass around, so we encouraged everyone to work from their homes. Well, 8 years ago, we went to total email communicative in the firm, and we had a very productive week. And only towards the end of the week did some of the people start coming back to the office because we had some big brochures to put together, and that still. But we can run Simmons and Company on a global basis from people working at home. We've invested the time and technology to do that. Grow food locally. The amount of energy we consume on this kind of mania that came up in the last 30 years of having, beautiful food available on our store shelves that'll stop real fast if we run out of gas, was a crazy way of living. We really basically created a sort of Starbucks economy. It didn't have any sustainability in it whatsoever.
And what I hear from you is this is the biggest worry, even bigger than climate change for the 21st century.
Climate change, the most rabid global warming people that I occasionally hear on television are talking about 20 to 30 years from now, having these catastrophic sort of New York's underwater. Whether or not that's even, but then others will say, no, it's really 100 years from now. This is a problem that basically could profoundly change our lives in the next 2 weeks.
Wow. How do we even find our way out of it?
I don't know, you faithful?
Thank you. I'm with Matt Simmons, and we're at ASPO conference. Thank you very much.
Peak oil and gas has an ominous parallel to this past financial crisis. Most wise observers do not grasp the meaning of peak oil. Too many energy pundits assume peak oil cannot happen. Few appreciate the flimsy nature of most key oil and gas data, and few grasp how savage a post-peak oil world can be and how swift a tipping point could happen. So my big question as I pondered this last week, with Gustav and Ike, the initial tremors of a coming Big Bang crisis. Many assume that Ike and Gustav merely grazed America's oil and gas complexes. Initial reports last Monday indicated that normality should return within weeks. The deterioration of those reports that happened throughout the week was stunning. The recent collapse in petroleum prices has created a false sense that somehow all of our problems may be behind us, and these two events could soon reveal serious cracks in the crumbling energy foundation. What we know thus far about the hurricane aftermath is that the Gulf of Mexico oil and gas production has been off stream since early September, and so far, as of last week, we've lost about 30 million barrels of oil. There are reports over the weekend that some of the facilities will come back probably by next week or the week after, and other facilities maybe in a matter of months. Many key refineries and gas plants are still shut down or barely producing. Loop in the Gulf of Mexico import system has been seriously crimped now for the better part of two. I think that's all now flowing smoothly, but the Houston Ship Channel still has some depth restrictions. These events are draining key crude stocks and depleting critical gasoline and diesel pools as we speak. And no one knows how much longer this can last before scarcity sets in. So how exposed is America's petroleum supply for a run on the bank that maybe could exceed the swift run on the bank of the Bear or Freddie Mac or Freddie Mae? With the lower we draw down crude, gasoline, heating oil, and diesel stocks, the closer we move towards breaching minimum operating levels. After minimum operating levels are breached, shortages become imminent. And the fear of scarcity encourages users to top off the tank. And topping off tanks creates literally a run on the bank. Who are the likely culprits? Refineries for scarce crude, jobbers for finished product, all service stations, heating oil distributors, petrochemical users, and then the ultimate risk carrier is the residential consumer. Let me give you an example of how fast we could break the gas pool bank. America has, in rough numbers, 220 million passenger vehicles. Assume each average vehicle holds about 20 gallons. Assume that the average tank now has about 5 gallons in it, which is probably not a bad number. Topping off would basically increase 15 gallons times 200 and many cars, so it would be a stock draw of 78 million barrels. As of last Friday, a week ago Friday, our current finished motor gasoline stocks, as reported by the EIA in the United States, excluding blending supplies, were 87 million barrels. It was also interesting that this was the lowest finished stock gasoline stocks we've had in the United States since 1969. So this would create a real crisis. What happens when usable stocks deplete? Well, vehicles stop until the system gets refilled. And without transportation, America's food supply is in jeopardy within probably a week or less. And the economy slows to a crawl, and financial markets panic. And energy risk is finally grasped in its raw sense. If heating oil also becomes scarce, a cold winter will be a disaster in the United States. America's heating oil is already at a near all-time low, and a few weeks of winter could deplete our usable stocks. We have 9 to 10 million homes in America that rely 100% on heating oil for winter heat. So the implications for the northeastern states, if we had a cold winter for any duration, would be catastrophic. Migration or hypothermia, and bankruptcy costs for heat. So is the size of our oil markets also too big to fill? The global petroleum use is now around 85 plus million barrels a day. That is the world's single largest industrial market by a factor of several-fold. Since it's so big, is it like Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae? And the answer is no. There's no parallels at all because there are no energy regulators, there is no audited data, and there are no firewalls. The world is totally at risk with no insurance policy because we have no Federal Reserve with the energy toolbox. Are there any other risks that become tipping points? Yes, the choke points for supply. The Straits of Malacca. Straits of Malacca, 70-mile stretch where the water is so shallow that basically you have to hole up on both ends until you get sort of a mean tide, is now transporting about 12 million barrels a day of crude oil to Singapore and every place, which direction we're going east of there, so that Asia can basically, one tanker accident in the Straits of Malacca. One single tanker accident would be a lights out event. The Straits of Hormuz, the Yucatan-Cuba passage that gets shut down when a hurricane comes in, and all the other points. Do we have any insurance policy or disaster recovery plan? We have a limited strategic petroleum reserve that should not be used to manage prices. We should take... We have basically, in rough numbers, 700 million barrels of not very high quality crude in our strategic petroleum reserve. That is the only insurance policy the United States of America has to mitigate against the fact that Luke could have been destroyed during night. And so to fool around with saying, let's just manage some oil out of that so we tamp down prices is irresponsible actions beyond my wildest imagination. Could an energy pandemic really happen? Is this scary set of scenarios just a thriller movie? And how long would it take to go from half empty to out of gas? If America had a run on our energy bank, could this trigger a global topping off of our tanks? Well, the world is sleepwalking through these energy events. Most global leaders have no idea of any of these risks are so real. Peak oil as a term is only slightly still understood by America's political and business leaders. And those who warned were called alarmists, pessimists, oil bulls, wolf criers. It took 5 months to melt down our key financial institutions. Last Monday, Alan Greenspan said what has just occurred is a once-in-a-century event. Bear Stearns' run on the bank happened in 2 days. Lehman Brothers' finale took 4 days to happen. AIG debacle occurred in 2 days. And too many key financial players kept assuring each other that the worst is far behind us while things got worse and worse. Energy markets can unwind faster. A global run on the energy bank would happen in less than a 30-day window. It would take a decade plus to rebuild any genuine energy cushion. This is the most serious global risk of the 21st century. So risk is real, and energy risk is real risk squared. And finally, here are a few energy oxymorons that refocus on risk. Here's some fashionable energy oxymorons that I hear too often. We need energy independence. Brutal energy reality, 100% impossible to create. We will never have energy independence. Oxymoron number 2, technology is a game changer. Brutal reality is technology has had zero impact on any of these risks. If anything, it highlighted the risk. Oxymoron number 3, we can drill our way out of this mess. Brutal reality, we have no spare rigs and few places to drill with any timely high impact. Oxymoron number 4, our energy system is efficient and transparent. Reality, we live in a dark world of hidden data, unlike Wall Street, which had light, but we didn't see it. This problem cannot be so ominous. Yes, it actually is so ominous because oil and gas is truly our industrial oxygen. And without oxygen, our system soon dies. All past crises were also ignored until they crossed the tipping point, and our tipping point might be just around the corner and coming soon. Peak oil is the singular most ominous risk of the 20th century, so thanks ASPO for highlighting these risks.
Matt, I'm curious, in this time of financial peril and trouble and strife and catastrophe, some people are calling it, what set of policies or rhetoric or language you might hear from the presidential candidates would make you bullish on America again? Would make you want to go long the U.S.? I'm dead serious.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. First of all, I'm a little, if I could get over the worry of us basically topping off our tanks, I've actually been a lot more sanguine about the underlying strength of the American economy as a result of high commodity prices. I think we're in the early stages of creating boom situations in a lot of parts of America that got left behind. I think that basically we're going to have to go back and rebuild our energy system. We're going to have to do that. That's going to be the biggest construction project in the history of the world, and that activity begets economic. I think that basically the Starbucks economy era came to a grinding halt, and that Wall Street has a long, long period of time of remorse before they'll ever get back to what we've seen. But that doesn't at all impact, Main Street America. And so I think that there's a lot of good news in the economy. All of that, unfortunately, comes to a screeching halt if we top up our tanks, which is why this issue is such a potential grievous crisis.
Bob Hirsch and Roger Bezdek and others have briefed both the McCain and Obama staffers. When will it be possible for an American presidential candidate to speak truth to power? It seems inevitable to me that sooner or later someone will have to say, here's the score.
Yeah. In my opinion, and I've passed this on to a lot of friends that are politicians, including your brother and your cousin, I think that it's entirely realistic for a political leader to speak as brutally candidly as I've been doing and be applauded for it. And the reason I say that is I've had the experience in the last couple of years of speaking at upwards of, I'd hate to guess, 40, 50, 60 universities around the country, and they're not Texas A&M. They have to be places like University of California, Santa Barbara, University of Vermont, University of New Hampshire, University of Virginia, University of Kentucky. And at virtually every one of these occasions, I basically get applauded and thanked profusely for coming and sharing this unpleasant news, and then ask, why aren't we hearing these from our political leaders? So I don't think this is a toxic subject. I think it's I'm watching Susan Collins in Maine create a 19-point lead over Tom Allen, who's a very respectable guy, because she's basically running on an energy platform. So I think that basically the people that figure out how to articulate energy are going to basically be applauded for.
Let's do a couple of more questions here. John Hoffmeister, he's a Shell guy, runs Shell, has suggested gasoline rationing might someday occur. Can you visualize a situation in which that happens?
Well, I got nervous enough around Memorial Day a year ago about how low our gasoline stocks were, and the unbelievable need to import, 1.2 million, 3 million, 400,000 barrels a day to basically just stabilize our stock drops, that I suggested to a Deputy Secretary of Energy who was at the OTC. I said, take a look at our gasoline stocks. They are really scarily low now, and we need to put in place a contingency plan of how we would ration. And they said, oh, you got to be joking. That's not an issue. And the next morning, I got a call from a senior staff person at the EIA who said, boy, you really shook up Assistant Secretary, I won't say his name. She came back to Washington and said, I feel a little bit stupid. I blurted out to Matt Simmons, oh, you're crazy. And I didn't actually even know what he was talking about. So call Matt back and find out kind of what he had in his mind. So I walked her through the issue. And I said, the problem is that if we ever had a run on the bank, and all it would take is have people getting nervous and they top up their tanks, we would have to basically stop it immediately, or we would drain the pool before and unfortunately, we can't ration anymore, because when we rationed in the summer of 1979, we used odd-even days by license plate, and that takes a service station attendant. And only about 3% of our service stations now have service station attendants. So the conversation switched to, oh my goodness, what would you do? I said, well, if it were up to me, and I'd pass this on to Sam Bodman, because I think it's actually useful advice, and I would basically go ahead now as a precaution and print up rationing books like we did in World War II. Because that is the only way that we could basically implement a rationing system and stop the run of the bank before it happened. Well, on the 30th birthday of the EIA in Washington, on my 65th birthday on April 7th, where they ironically had a 2-hour peak oil debate, I saw the person afterwards, and she said, man alive, I've been thinking about that conversation ever since. I brought that up at a staff meeting, and I was sort of laughed at. He said, I've been driving around greater Washington, and what worries me is seeing how many of our service stations, you can see on the tank what the last consumer just did, and so many times it's $5 of gas in, or $10 of gas in. It's rarely ever $39.50. So she said, I'm worried that too many people are basically running on almost empty now. So rationing books are the only way we could do it, but we never printed the books up, and now it's probably too late.
Will cities or rural areas be most affected by what you see coming?
I think we're all basically impacted. The problem is, the longer you basically are away from where you live to where you work, the more you have to drive, and the more jarring it becomes if we run out of gasoline. On the other hand, one of the solutions that I've been talking about ad nauseum the last 3 or 4 years is liberating the workforce and paying by productivity and letting people actually work at home. We have the toolbox to do that. So maybe this will be the tipping point when we basically finally just say, you know what, the days of all driving downtown, the days of driving out to the factory are effectively over for 75, 80% of us. And that might not be all bad news.
If energy is the original currency and Hank and Ben can print money, but not create energy. What is your suggestion for an average investor? Where should they be over the next 10-year period of time?
Well, I'm asked that question a lot, and I think it obviously depends on your, appetite for risk. But I think that it would behoove anybody to assume peak oil is real, and assume these problems are real, and then just go through your portfolio and say, what do I own that just gets crushed in such an event, and get rid of it. And then I would certainly make sure that I had a smattering of exposure to the rebuilding of the energy infrastructure, because it's going to happen. And I wouldn't basically, pick one or two companies and say, now I have a good energy portfolio. I happen to basically be not very sanguine about the outlook for the major oil companies. I think they're now in permanent liquidation, so I wouldn't own one of them. But I think a company like a Baker Hughes or a Schlumberger or a Weatherford or a Transocean, their future has to be good. Because if it isn't, we have really bad problems in front of us.
Ethics aside, should the U.S. print more colored paper to give to oil-producing countries now to get all the oil we can from them before these countries realize the paper is no longer worth anything?
Well, I don't think...
That's from Jeremy Gilbert, I think.
I don't think we have much of a chance. I think we basically ought to be, count our lucky stars that we actually still have people shipping us oil.
Let's end on that sunny note. Matt, one more big round of applause. Thank you so much.